Hi, I'm Chris Cox. I am the chair of radiology at Creighton, Omaha. And it is an honor today to get to introduce Dr. Richard Gunderman, who is a pediatric radiologist by training. He's coming to us from Indiana University. He is also has a doctorate in philosophy and has written some of my favorite articles and books about medicine and many other things. One of my favorites, actually, at the very beginning of my career, I read Achieving Excellence in Medical Education, and it became foundational for how I saw medical education. And it's really an honor to have him here today. And he's going to be talking with us about harnessing adversity for excellence. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much. It's a real treat to be here today, and I hope you'll find this talk of interest. I think it's about a person who was the subject of the first conversation Chris Cox and I ever had, or at least one of the first ones. And it's really a topic and a story I haven't revisited in quite a long time. Can't imagine giving this talk anywhere but in Omaha and at the invitation of Dr. Cox. So I hope you'll find this intriguing. It's really, to a large degree, drawn from sports. I don't think sports is the only good metaphor for medicine, but I think it's a good one that deserves more attention than it sometimes gets. So this is about adversity and what we can gain from adversity about excellence. So the person I'm going to talk about is considered the greatest coach in the history of American sports. He was ESPN's coach of the century. The Sporting News and Sports Illustrated also named him not the greatest coach in the history of his sport, but simply the greatest coach in the history of American sport. And I think we can learn a lot from his life and his career of making good things come out of adversity. So that's actually an image from a small town in the state of my birth where I now reside. It's called Martinsville, Indiana. There's no reason you would have heard of it. I'll come back to it in a minute. But the person I'm going to talk about, the greatest coach in the history of American sport, was one of his family's 7 children. And both his sisters died, one little girl in infancy and the other at age 2. And John Wooden, too, was from Indiana, and every time he came back, he would make sure to visit his sister's graves. Neither of his parents graduated from high school. He was born in 1910. His family lost their farm, had to move to the town of Martinsville, Indiana. He grew up in a house with dirt floors and no running water, which I'm happy to say isn't the typical environment for children growing up in my home state today. And really didn't have a chance to play his sport until late in the day after he completed quite a hefty list of chores. That building may not look like much, but it's on the National Register of Historic Places. And it was built in Martinsville, Indiana in about 1920. And the town of Martinsville had 4,800 residents. Not very big. That facility seated 5,200 spectators. So, dreaming big, aspiring to be more than you are. Martinsville, Indiana didn't have much, but you may have heard the term Hoosier hysteria. People from Indiana like the sport of basketball, and our, at the moment, mystery person played basketball there. And I think that's the reason that it's today on the National Register of Historic Places. Who is our mystery person? John Wooden, that's exactly right. So here he is on the state championship basketball team. He led the Martinsville Artesians to 3 consecutive state championship games, winning one of them. He was the first person in our state's history to be a 3-time All-State basketball player. In 1927, they won the championship. He then went to Purdue University, the Boilermakers, now one of the nation's top engineering schools. It's in the top 5, and it's multiple times as big as the other 4 schools in the top 5. So it's a really big engineering school, sometimes called Astronaut University, because more US astronauts have degrees from Purdue University than any other single institution. John Wooden wanted to play at Indiana University, but for financial reasons couldn't, and played at Purdue. He became the United States' first 3-time consensus All-American, started teaching high school English and playing semi-professional basketball, and he set a record that still stands in professional basketball of making 138 consecutive free throws. And this, by the way, is John Wooden. John Wooden and I actually have 2 things in common. One, we're both from Indiana. Number 2, at our peak, we both stood 5 feet 10 inches tall. So even then, basketball was a tall person's sport, and Wooden was the first 3-time consensus All-American in the history of American basketball. Pretty impressive. And there were lots of reasons to think that he was not going to succeed when he took the head coaching job at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. UCLA was a crummy basketball program when he arrived in the 1940s. They had won 1 of the 18 conference championships. Their record the year before was 12-13, 12 wins, 13 losses. They shared a locker room and facility with other sports teams. This is actually what was then known as the men's gymnasium. This is where the UCLA Bruins men's basketball team played all their home games, and it seated 2,400 people. So John Wooden had gone from playing in a facility that seated 5,200 people in Little Martinsville, Indiana, and now he's the head coach of UCLA, and they're in a facility that only seats 2,400. It was actually known as the BO barn. BO, you may know, stands for body odor, because it was so cramped and hot. It was a terrible place to watch basketball. So Wooden's prospects for success were poor. His family was poor. He didn't have any educational advantages. There were no athletic scholarships in his day. He taught high school English for well over a dozen years in Dayton, Kentucky, and South Bend, Indiana, before he got his first job at what's now Indiana State University. Who's the most famous alumnus of Indiana State University? Larry Bird. That's exactly right, the basketball player. So Wooden had many strikes against him in life. He wasn't tall, but he was a person with a remarkably clear sense of purpose. And I'm not sure our training in medicine necessarily fosters in us a deep and clear sense of purpose. But I think this is an area where we can really learn from John Wooden and maybe enhance our own performance, and even more importantly, the performance of people we work with. And when I say performance, by the way, I'm not talking about, diagnostic accuracy or report turnaround times or RVU production. I'm talking about being a better radiologist and contributing more to the care of patients. So you may know Wooden, in the space of 12 years, he and the UCLA Bruins men's basketball team in 12 years won 10 NCAA championships, including 7 in a row. They set a record of 88 consecutive wins. Anybody know where that record started and ended? It was actually the University of Notre Dame up in South Bend, Indiana, where Wooden coached high school basketball. But so they won the first game against Notre Dame and then lost their 89th game there. By the way, if you ever see the press conference of that game, this tells you a whole lot. John Wooden is positively beaming when the streak is broken at 88 games, a multi-season streak. He is beaming, smiling, lighting up the room with a smile. Why is he so happy that his team lost? The answer is because they could forget about that stupid streak and refocus on being the best basketball team they could. So he's Coach of the Year 6 times. First person to be inducted into the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame as both a player and a coach. And as I said, ESPN, Sporting News, Sports Illustrated all said he's the greatest coach ever. How did he get to be so good? Ironically, I think the roots of that greatness lie in his relatively deprived childhood. His family didn't have much, but his parents had a very clear sense of purpose and did their best to impart that to their children. So this is John Wooden in front of all his trophies. How does he feel about posing for this photograph for the UCLA Alumni Office? You're a master of image interpretation. How does he feel? Why? He's being heralded as the greatest coach, and that'd be like being heralded as the greatest radiologist in the history of the field. Why would he look like this? Well, we don't know for sure, but I have my suspicions. I think it's because he knows this picture is kind of a lie. He didn't win those championships, right? His teams did. Teams with 18-person rosters. He was an important part of those teams, but he didn't do it by himself. And in a way, posing for this picture feels like a bit of a betrayal of what he stood for, not only his entire career, but his entire life. So I like to talk about something John Wooden's father is said to have given him when John Wooden graduated from the 8th grade. His father handed him a 3x5 card that had this 7-point creed. That, by the way, is his dad and his mom, neither of whom graduated from high school, lived in southern Indiana in the late 18th and early 19th century. And I want to go through each of these because I think they can teach us a lot. Now, you might say, you know, these points seem pretty homely to me. I mean, everybody knows this. We've known it since kindergarten or preschool. Why are we spending time on it? But I think it's easy to forget some of the most important things we learned in preschool and kindergarten. We think we become more sophisticated, more knowledgeable, more successful, in some cases like my own, beyond anything I would have dreamed of when I was 4 or 5 years old. But we can also become distanced and even alienated from what was best in us in our early life. And Wooden made sure that didn't happen. So he always had on his person copies of this 3x5 card that contained the 7-point creed. And it's what he tried to live by. You might say, well, creed isn't for me. Okay, what would your creed be? What would your 7-point creed be? You know? Make more money than everybody else, have the shortest turnaround time in the department, you know, publish more papers than anybody else. I don't know. But John Wooden thought those were not real goals. They weren't a real creed. Creed, you may know, comes from the Latin, like credo, to believe in. John Wooden thought we need things to believe in, not just an action plan and a strategic plan to achieve some career goal, but real purposes in living. And for him, these were purposes in living that spilled over into the way he taught English and coached basketball. And by the way, Wooden always said he wanted to be thought of as a teacher. One of his best players, Bill Walton, said that, you know, John Wooden was an English teacher who coached basketball on the side. But what he really cared about was books and ideas. What do you really care about? You know, how many of us know with clarity and conviction what we really care about? And to what degree does that shine through in the work we do every day? That might actually matter more than we suppose. It's not on the core exam of the American Board of Radiology. It wasn't on USMLE step 1, 2, or 3. It wasn't on the SAT or the ACT, right? You've been scoring on those tests your whole life and scoring really well, right? All the way back to your APGAR score, huh? 10 out of 10 times 2. This isn't the kind of thing you can score on. There's no score on this, but these could be principles that could guide and shape all our lives. So let's go through them one by one. The first one's be true to yourself, which is hard to do if you don't know yourself. Some of you may know that if you went to consult the oracle at Delphi in ancient Greece outside of Athens, you would pass under an archway with a sign on it that said, know yourself. The Greeks thought the key was to know yourself, not to be wrapped up in yourself, not to be a navel gazer, but simply really to understand what your strengths and weaknesses are, what your true interests are in life, where you have the most potential to contribute. We really need to know ourselves in that way. And Wooden loved to say your success comes not from victories. He didn't talk about victories. The greatest coach in the history of American sport didn't talk about winning and losing, but from knowing you did the best you could to be the best you could be. What would that look like for you? For 5 minutes, for an hour, for a day at work, a month, a quarter, a year, a career? What would the best of which you're capable look like? Wooden thought we really need to spend some time thinking and talking about that. So here he is, what he played for the Purdue Boilermakers. Again, the first consensus 3-time All-American in the history of American collegiate basketball. He said, don't measure yourself by what you have accomplished, but by what you should have accomplished with your ability. The guy was 5 feet 10 inches tall. He wasn't particularly strong either, but he knew where the basketball would be. You know, he paid attention to the game. He was aware of the flow of the game to a greater degree than the other players on the court. You know, Wayne Gretzky, famously, the greatest hockey player, maybe in at least American history, said, I don't skate to where the puck is, I skate to where the puck is going to be. That was, you know, John Wooden's approach, I would say, as a basketball player. He understood the direction that the game was moving in, and he could position himself appropriately. So number 2 is help others. And Wood never talked about the willingness to sacrifice personal interest or gain for the welfare of all. Not the willingness. What Wooden talked about was the eagerness. How many of us come to work in the morning thinking, you know, my mission here is to bring out the best in the other people I work with and will care for today. This is not about me and making myself look good. When I, pull into the parking garage or get out of my car or open the door to the hospital or sit down at my workstation or, pick up the implements for the first procedure of the day, according to Wooden, we should be thinking about how can I make a difference that helps other people be at their best. That's what he really cared about. And you could see that, for example, in Wooden's favorite professional basketball player. Who's that? Who's John Stockton? Native of Spokane, Washington, right? Graduate of Gonzaga University. He was a basketball player his entire career at the Utah Jazz. Some of you know the Jazz franchise started where? New Orleans. Makes sense. Utah Jazz? What? But yeah, they started in New Orleans, but Stockton played his entire career in Salt Lake City, professional career. What makes him special? Yeah, I think that's a great summary. There are 5 statistical categories that dominate basketball: scoring, rebounds, blocked shots, steals, you get the ball from the other team, and assists. There's only one person who ranks at the top of 2 of those categories. And as you might guess, it's John Stockton. He's the all-time steal leader. That sounds a lot like John Wooden. He knew where the ball was going to be before it got there. And he's by far the number 1 assist leader. Who's number 2 on the NBA all-time assist list? By the way, an assist is where you get the ball to somebody else, a teammate, and then they score, right? You're not scoring. Here's my brilliant idea to have a championship basketball team. See what you think about my brilliant idea. I'll pay the players by the number of points they score. How much would we have to pay NBA players? $10,000 a point. You tell me, that may be too low. $10,000 a point. Go out there and play your best. You think, this is genius, right? An incentive compensation system for professional basketball players. Why didn't anybody else think about that? Why didn't they think of it? What's wrong with my brilliant system? That's a good thought. The score would be 200 to 199 every game. That's a good idea. And another thing, of course, is I get the ball. What am I going to do with it? You know, I'm going to shoot, right? So teamwork may go out the window. That was the absolute antithesis of Wooden. Number 2 on the NBA all-time assist list, Jason Kidd, 13,000. John Stockton, 17,000. You know, according to John Wooden, there was no player in professional. By the way, he didn't coach Stockton. As I said, he was from Gonzaga University. Wooden was at UCLA. But in his views, when Stockton was on the floor, he did more to bring out the best in his teammates than any other player in basketball. Who's that person at the Department of Radiology at Creighton University? By the way, this isn't a competition to be number 1. Could each of us be more of that person, right? Not only in the Department of Radiology, but maybe in the health center, or the medical school, maybe in our personal lives. Our mission is not to make ourselves shine, but to bring out the best in the people who count on us and who we work with. That could be a very different notion of what it means to be. And by the way, Stockton came from very humble circumstances, very large family. His dad owned basically a bar. His dad had never lived more than 5 blocks from where he was born in Spokane, Washington. There was no reason to think John Stockton would ever amount to anything. But he was fortunate he got to play basketball with much bigger kids from a very young age. And, he obviously had certain native talents, but that kind of environment brought out the best in him. Not people born with silver spoons in their mouths, but people who, because they had little, were forced to think very seriously about how they could make the most of what they had. John Stockton, by the way, at his peak playing physique, stood 6 feet 1 inch tall and weighed 175 pounds. Just so you know, the average NBA player is 6'7" and 225. He was 50 pounds lighter than the average player. How do you excel when you lack the kind of gifts that seem to be necessary to be good? Well, maybe it turns out in at least some context, it's more important to have a very clear vision of who you are and what you're trying to contribute. And that could even outweigh the natural gifts that other people might rely on. That's certainly a very Wooden-esque point of view, something he tried to instill in his players. So number 3, make friendship a fine art. Who's that guy on the left? Yeah, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, until just recently, the all-time leading scorer in NBA history. Of course, that's no longer true. Partly because Jabbar played, went to college for 4 years. The current point leader went straight from high school to professional basketball, so had 4 additional years to score points, compared to the man John Wooden knew as Lou Alcindor, converted to Islam shortly after graduating from college. But a Sports Illustrated reporter went to Wooden's small condominium in Encino, California, and interviewed him when he was 97 years old. And he said, Coach, I'd like to go over the players on your championship team rosters just to get a sense of what you thought they contributed. Well, it turned out that Wooden not only remembered what they contributed on the basketball court, but in a 118-person roster, 10 championship teams, 180 players, in 172 cases, Wooden knew where those men lived, their marital status, how many children they had, what career they were in. Wooden was very proud of the fact that 10 of his former championship players were now ministers, people of the cloth, like priests or clergy people, rabbis, what have you. Wooden stayed in touch with these people. He coached his last game in 1975. He had stayed in touch with these people for 48 years after he stopped coaching them. Whatever he was doing, it wasn't about How many of us stay in touch, with our high school classmates, our college classmates, our medical school classmates? How many of us will stay in touch with the people we do residency with? How important are our teams to us? I think most of us have been grained into the habit of thinking about ourselves. I'm here to shine. I'm here to perform well. This is about me, right? When I applied to college, when I applied to medical school, when I applied to residency, I had to write personal statements. Personal statements must be about me, right? I, me. That was not John Wooden. John Wooden was we, us. And that may sound trivial, but that could also be positively transformative when it comes to bringing out the best in teams of people. And I could tell you this from my own experience. I once mentioned John Wooden in a talk to the Indiana State Dental Association. One of the stars of the movie Hoosiers, starring Gene Hackman and Barbara Hershey, came up and talked with me afterward. He says, I was at some event in South Bend and mentioned John Wooden, and a guy came up to me and said, I was the backup third baseman 1 year on one of the high school baseball teams John Wooden coached. I came up to him 50 years later and said, Coach Wooden, you probably don't. He knew his name, remembered he was the backup third baseman. Wooden could tell you the starting rosters of all the high school baseball teams he had coached. Who does that? Who cares that much? Maybe what really matters isn't caring about success. Maybe it's caring about people. So again, Wooden didn't have much. There was not much to predict he was going to be very successful. He wasn't gifted in any obvious way, but he had real clarity of purpose. How do you draw excellence out of adversity? I think the key ingredient, among other things, might be to have real clarity of purpose, real conviction or dedication that you've been called to something that really matters. And John Wooden coached and lived with that conviction. So here he is, Coach Wooden, many years after he was retired, hugging perhaps the greatest player, or second greatest player he ever coached, Bill Walton. And Bill Walton wrote about Coach Wooden. The thing that gets me about Coach is that there'll be others who win 10 championships. At that point, Phil Jackson had won 10. He went on to win a couple of more, right, with the Chicago Bulls and Los Angeles Lakers. But the thing that separates Coach from so many others is his focus on relationships. He truly loved his players. He was a man of genuine and enduring love. Will anybody ever say that about you? She was a radiologist. She was a physician. She was a person of genuine and enduring love. What reasons are you giving the people you work with and the patients you care for the opportunity to say something like that about you? Now, that might sound like it doesn't matter much. How's that going to boost my RVUs, right? My productivity. What's that going to do for my report turnaround time? How is this going to get me more grants or more papers published or help me rise up through the institutional ranks till I'm top dog? I don't know. But, maybe that's ultimately what matters. Maybe none of that other success really matters unless it's for the right reason. And this is an example of what a right reason looks like. Has to do with who you are as a person, not the lines on your CV or resume. Number 4, by the way, again, there are only 7 points in this 7-point creed. Number 4 is drink deeply from good books. What was the last good book you read? I asked medical students and residents and fellows and faculty candidates all the time. I would say the most common response I get is a deer in the headlights look. I mean, people will literally say, read? Book? I mean, we live at the high point of literacy in human situation, but we are, most of us, illiterate when it comes to the things John Wooden cared about. Who would read a Jane Austen novel? Who would read a Charles Dickens novel? Who would want to read the poetry of Emily Dickinson or Walt Whitman or T.S. Eliot? What are you, crazy? Didn't I tell you I'm a radiologist? I'm a hotshot, you know? I make $500,000 a year. That'd be $1 million a year. You think I have time to read books? Don't kid yourself. You know, John Wooden's not going to be very happy with that answer, because I think John Wooden, remember, he thought he was an English teacher who coached basketball to pay the bills. I think Wooden thought that you can only be as good as the books you've read and the conversations you've had about those books. What kind of investment are you making in reading well? You know, what would it take to set aside an hour a week to read well? What would that look like? You know, how much wisdom is to be found in here, or in the blue journal, or the gray journal, or the yellow journal, versus what other resources are available to you as a reader that could make a much bigger difference. Anyway, this is John Wooden with his wife, Nell, and their 2 kids. He's just found out he's going to be the head basketball coach at UCLA, which, by the way, is not good news to the Wooden family, because they wanted to stay in the Midwest and go to the University of Minnesota. But a snowstorm knocked down the phone lines. The deadline came to yes or no to UCLA. He said yes. He almost immediately heard from Minnesota, we're offering you the job, but he felt that he committed to go to UCLA. So off they went to Westwood, right, in Los Angeles, California. But, you know, the same Sports Illustrated, remember the guy who asked him about his 180 championship roster players? He reported he'd been in Wooden's condominium. He said, you know, by the way, his wife had died 40 years earlier. So Wooden was living alone for decades. The reporter said, if you went through John Wooden's condominium, you would have no clue that he had anything to do with basketball or coaching. There were no, you know, bronze Sports Illustrated covers or plaques or trophies or anything. The walls were lined with books, because that was what Wooden cared about. You'd never know he'd been a basketball coach, let alone the greatest coach in the history of American sports. He thought what really matters was things like books and learning. What he called morals, we might call ethics or character. Who are you as a person? Are you courageous? Are you compassionate? Are you wise? Wooden believed you could cultivate those traits, and I think really challenged us to do so. So we've got adversities, right? We're under pressure to produce more, to be more productive. We've got, you know, information systems that don't always fit well with our, you know, our workflow and so forth. We got frustrations, who knows, with parking, all kinds of problems confronting us in life. Downward pressure on the reimbursement, so-called, for radiological services. But amidst that adversity, we've got tremendous opportunities, which Wooden really recognized. We could focus on reading better, becoming more learned where it really matters, and developing our own characters by trying to contribute to the character development of others. Number 5, again, there are only 7. What's that? Somebody knows. What is that? Yeah, that's a Ford Taurus. It's a 1989 Ford Taurus. Why is that up there? Well, because John Wooden, who died in 2010, said his 1989 Ford Taurus was the best car he ever owned. What will be the best car you ever own? Tesla? Mercedes? Lambo? What will be your best car? John Wooden. This guy, his Ford Taurus was the best car he ever owned. He loved it. We know from the athletic director at UCLA that John Wooden never asked for a raise. The last year he coached his 10th championship team and then retired in 1975. His annual salary was $35,000. And you might say, wow, gosh, 1975, that's what, 48 years ago? Things have changed a lot. I bet that's worth 100K now. Okay, consumer price index. I'll go with you on that. Let's say it's 100K. I don't think it's that much, but maybe it is. Anybody know any big time college sports programs where the basketball coach makes 100,000 a year? How much do you think the coaches at University of Nebraska or Creighton pull in? I bet it's a lot more than that. Wooden just didn't care about money. What's the matter with him? Hypothesis number one, he was stupid. John Wooden was stupid. He didn't know how valuable he was. By the way, he was actually offered the job to become the manager of the Pittsburgh Pirates. What's wrong with that statement? The baseball team. John Wooden's favorite sport was baseball. His favorite sport was baseball, not basketball. But for whatever reason, he ends up coaching basketball. He didn't take those jobs, to go to the pros because he didn't care about the money. He was a teacher. His mission was to take, in his case, because he coached men's basketball, young men and help them become better people. What's your mission, in the residency? Maybe you go out and get a faculty job somewhere. What will your mission be? From Wooden's point of view, to be a teacher is maybe the highest mission. I don't know if you know this, but the word doctor comes from Latin. The word doctor means teacher. You're a doctor of medicine. That means you're a teacher of medicine. You teach patients about their symptoms and signs, their diagnostic workup, the therapeutic implications, prognostic implications. You teach patients, but you also teach other health professionals. So maybe John Wooden was stupid. Maybe he was crazy. 35K, are you kidding? But I think there's another hypothesis. What if John Wooden was neither stupid nor crazy? You'll make way more money in the first 10 years of your career than John Wooden ever made. Does that mean you're worth more than John Wooden was? That you're contributing more to the lives of other people than John Wooden did? I don't know. Sometimes the money isn't actually the best reflection of true worth. So here's John Wooden, what really mattered to him. If you ask, I'm from Indianapolis, the Colts, we used to have Peyton Manning, very good quarterback. Peyton Manning, you just won the 2005 Super Bowl. Get the Lombardi Trophy, named after Vince Lombardi, the second greatest coach in American history. You just won the Super Bowl, Peyton Manning. What are you going to do now? What's the answer? Well, that's a good answer. Reva's right about that. But for years and years, people would say, I'm going to Disney World. Right? Because that's where you have fun, in Disney World. Where everything's fake, pretend, artificial. It's all manufactured. What did John Wooden do? This is hard to believe, but back in the old days, the NCAA championship game would be played on a Saturday afternoon. So he won that game 10 times, his teams did. What did he do after he won the NCAA men's basketball championship? The answer is, the next morning, John Wooden would get up and take his grandkids to church. And then after the game, they'd go out for ice cream. That was how John Wooden celebrated a national championship. Get up the next day, go to church, and then take the grandkids for ice cream. Stupid, right? Crazy. Who does that? He should head for Vegas, right? Someplace like that. That was not John Wooden. You may say, this Wooden guy's kind of interesting, but I don't want to touch him with a 10-foot pole. That's not the kind of life I want to lead with my $500,000 radiologist salary. Why would I want to lead that kind of life? That's not going to get me a Lamborghini or a Ferrari, or a Tesla Plaid. That's not my path. But anyway, it's John Wooden's path, and there might be something in it. Wooden always said, if I were ever prosecuted for my religion, I hope there'd be enough evidence to convict me. Maybe the word religion's prejudicial. What do you believe in most deeply? What are your deepest, deepest convictions as a human being? The things you care about most, the last things you'd give up if the things that matter to you were stripped away one by one. What would you hang on to the last moment? How many people in this room know that about you? How clearly does that shine through in the work you do every day? Now, you might say, well, I don't care. What do I care if other people know what my deepest convictions are? But from Wooden's point of view, that's the brightest light you have to shine. Right? Don't cover that with a bushel basket. Let that light shine forth. Not to, proselytize or try to, convert people to some other perspective, but simply let what's most important to you, and therefore, in a sense, best about you, shine through in the work you do. Wooden really wanted his players, even the opposing player and opposing coaches, to know what really mattered to him. Number 6, give thanks for blessings. This is one of Wooden's most famous phrases. You can't live a perfect day without doing something for someone who will never be able to repay you. What's today? July the 6th, 2023. Are you headed for a perfect day? By the way, he didn't say that's enough, but he said you can't have a perfect day unless you've done something for someone who will never be able to repay you. How about that? That's not just Monday through Friday, that's 7 days a week. No time off for holidays. Every day of my life, if it's going to be a perfect day, I have to do at least one thing for somebody who will never be able to repay me. Not that they won't repay me, they can't repay me. Why? Because this is about giving, not about making a deal, not about investing, hoping for a return. This is simply to make a difference in that other person's life. And this is, of course, John Wooden with one of his great-grandchildren, his great-granddaughter. He thought this was the key to having the best life you can. Every day I'm going to do at least one thing. Here he is with his wife. Well, now, I said she predeceased him by about 40 years. I can't remember the date. Let's say they got married on the 7th of the month, which also happened to her birthday was on the 7th of whatever month it was. After she died, every month on the 7th, John Wooden would go to her gravesite and sit on a bench, and he would take out paper and sit there and write her a letter. And then he would fold the letter up, put it in an envelope, and tie it with a pink ribbon because pink was her favorite color. And then he'd take that envelope back and put it under her pillow of the bed they shared for 40 years. You were wondering about the 35K, right? Yeah, I think he is crazy. Now it's been confirmed. What kind of a nutcase writes letters to a dead person? Who would do that? Only a crazy person. That might be an ICD, 10. That might be in DSM 6 or wherever we are, probably 5R. I don't know. That might be, you can get certified for that as nuts. But that's what Wooden did. Why? Because he thought the relationships in our lives should be viewed as on a trajectory that carries on even after our lives come to an end. I mean, did that mean he believed in eternal life? I don't know. But at the very least, he thought we can really only be the people we're supposed to be and bring out the best in others if we see our lives as on a trajectory that doesn't come crashing down the moment we die. Here's the last one. Make each day your masterpiece. Could that apply to July? Today's the 6th, isn't it? Did I say 7th? Oh, good. Okay. The 6th. This is Bill Walton talking about Coach Wooden. Coach Wooden never talked about winning and losing. How do you like that? The greatest coach in the history of American sport never mentioned wins or losses. What will you ask your kids when they get back from their soccer game? Well, when you see them that night, right? Because you've been in the hospital churning out those cases, right? But at the end of the day, you see them right before they go to bed. Hey, didn't you have a soccer game today? Doesn't sound like John Wooden, does it? Didn't you have a soccer game today? What do you ask him? Did you win? John Wooden never would have asked his kids if they won because he didn't care about winning and losing. He talked about the effort to win. Did you try your best? Did you bring out the best in your teammates? Did you play fair? Did you enjoy the game? All that mattered more than winning and losing. He rarely talked about basketball. How do you like that? Everybody knows him as a basketball coach. He didn't talk about basketball. Everybody knows you as your radiologist. How much time do you spend talking about radiology? Could there be something more important to talk about? Even at work as a radiologist than radiology? Maybe the answer is yes. He talked about life. He never talked about strategy, statistics, or plays, but rather about people and character. You know, I don't know if you probably never seen John Wooden coaching, but the video recordings are there. The Bruins were often down near the end of the game. You know, there's 3 seconds to go and, you know, they're going to be inbounding the ball. You never saw Wooden with a dry erase board or a chalkboard diagramming the play. He never did that. Why? Because he believed he'd done his best to bring out the best in his players at a team during practice. His attitude was during the game, I want to be as surprised as the opposing players by what my team does. What does that say? I trust these guys. We've given our absolute best to become the best team we can, to bring out the best in each other on the court. Basketball changes split second to split second. You can go in with an idea, but as Clausewitz said, the best of battle plans become obsolete when the first shot is fired. I'm not going to waste my time diagramming plays. I'm just going to let my players do what they've learned to do, perform at their absolute best as a team. Do you trust the people you work with? You know, the people who will someday work for you? Maybe that matters a lot. Wooden thought it did. He really talked about strategy, statistics, or plays, but about people and character. Coach Wooden never tired of telling us that once you become a good person, you have a chance of becoming a good basketball player. Could that be true for radiology or surgery or internal medicine or pediatrics or departmental administration? Once you become a good person, you stand a good chance to become a good CEO or a good CMO, a good radiologist. I think he's probably right about that. We can never be better radiologists than we are physicians. And we can never be better physicians than we are human beings. And that means trying to help one another become better human beings is and probably should be our very top priority. Who's the guy on our left? I'll give you a hint. He's the only player who never started a game in college, but was drafted in the first round. He's the only player to ever lead the American Basketball Association and the National Basketball Association, the ABA and NBA in rebounds. Who is that guy? His name's Sven Nader. He was from the Netherlands. He was Dutch, Holland. His stepfather wouldn't let him play basketball. He was 7 feet tall. His stepfather wouldn't let him play basketball. Grew up in Northern California. Finally, he went off to community college and decided to try out for the basketball team. What happened? He showed up barefoot because he couldn't afford tennis shoes, basketball shoes. This is literally true. He couldn't afford the shoes. He was sent out. Don't come back till you have shoes. He actually went and stole a teammate's shoes. Came back. The coach said, "You're done. Get out of here." The end of a career that never started. Anyway, he eventually found his way into junior college basketball. Wooden got him to come to UCLA. Why? Not because he was going to play a lot. His scoring average was about 3 points a game. His rebounds were about 3 a game. He was never a big contributor in the usual categories, but his mission was to bring out the best in Bill Walton in practice. And he did that beautifully. And if you look at the press conferences of those UCLA teams, when the press asks, hey, how about that Bill Walton? 23 of 24 from the field. We've never seen anything like it. Wooden would invariably talk about Sven Nader, a guy who maybe played 3 or 4 minutes to give Walton a rest. Number 18, maybe on the roster of 18. But that's not how Wooden saw it. He always thought in terms of the team. Everybody on the team mattered. Nobody mattered more than anybody else. And, maybe that's a kind of attitude we could do well with if we had more in our field, in medicine. Nader actually became, as I indicated, a pretty good basketball player, but he couldn't even afford shoes. But, to Wooden, that was an opportunity to cultivate your longing, your aspiration for what really matters, and to focus on it even more. Sometimes, our greatest enemy may not be our failures, but our successes. Maybe we become complacent. I've done enough. I don't need to strive anymore. I can coast from this point. Certainly not the way Wooden saw it. So those may not look like much. John Wooden started from real adversity in life. His prospects appeared dim, to say the least. But he had this clear sense of purpose, this 7-point creed by which he guided himself. And I think that enabled him to turn impoverishment into a kind of riches. Somebody who started out with very little in life could see clearly what he's here for, what his purpose was, and that enabled him to develop a real passion for excellence. And to the extent that's communicable or transmissible, that it could go from people like Wooden to people like us, I'm inclined to think that's a good thing. The challenges we face aren't just efforts to hold us down, they're also opportunities to step back, reflect, talk with others, and maybe come back seeing more clearly than we did before what really matters. I can tell you in my own life, some of my biggest disappointments professionally have, in at least most cases, turned out to be pretty clearly blessings. I don't remember, but I bet when I was 11 years old, I thought I was going to become a professional baseball player. Or, who knows, an astronaut. I don't know what I wanted to do. At this point, I'm kind of glad that didn't happen. I wasn't particularly athletic, not tall, not good looking, not talented, not particularly bright. All those things turned out to be a real blessing because other pathways that I couldn't even see when I was 11 turned out to open up during college and medical school. Same thing may be true for you. What seems like adversity may actually be an opportunity, a chance to step back and think more deeply about what we're really here for and what we most aspire to in life. And that's exactly what John Wooden thought every one of us needs to do. All right, I think I'll stop there and hope that this might have given rise to some comments or questions. Hard to tell, but anybody have any comments or thoughts about John Wooden?
And when you're talking about purpose, do you think that there's a greater sense of imposter syndrome that relates to a vacuum in purpose, or do you think it's unrelated to that, or something else?
It's a great point. My understanding of imposter syndrome is, now I'm in radiology residency and I'm wondering, gee, do I really belong here? Am I smart enough, knowledgeable enough, dedicated enough? Do I belong with these other people? Maybe this isn't where I'm supposed to be. Maybe I'm not good enough for this. That would be one way to think about imposter syndrome. I think it wouldn't have occurred to John Wooden because he would have regarded whatever station he occupied in life as an opportunity to cultivate what was best in himself and the people around him to meet whatever those needs or challenges or opportunities were. So I don't think Wooden was ever thinking about himself. do I belong here? Am I good enough? It was, I've been presented with this opportunity. I think he would have thought that must be for some reason. I'm going to see what I can make of this opportunity, you know? So maybe this is unfair, and I'm not a psychiatrist or clinical psychologist. I'm just a regular guy from Indiana. But I think imposter syndrome might imply that some of us spend a little bit too much time thinking about ourselves and could spend a little bit more time thinking about other people. You know, it's not really, do I belong here? It's, by golly, here I am. What can I contribute? How can I help bring out the best in these other people? You know, they may fire me or cut me from the team. Bad things may happen. There's nothing I can do about that, except to the extent that I can do my absolute best to bring out the best in the other people. And as long as I'm doing that, I'm doing the best I can. Any other comments or questions? I have not, but I've heard of it. And by the way, I heard Jason Sudeikis, who plays Ted Lasso, say that he did not think he could have done that series except what he read about Coach John Wooden's philosophy. That's all I got. But you know more. Yeah, that's a true story. Jason Sudeikis said that. And not just the series, but really in his mind, his life. He used to be an improvisational comedy teacher, teach people like at Second City how to perform well in improvisation. And according to him, he was really applying Wooden's ideas. And you can see that apparently in this series, Ted Lasso on Apple TV, which I've never seen. But I love the idea that those, by the way, none of these ideas originated with John Wooden. He didn't march up a mountain and get handed some stone tablets with, ideas no human being had ever encountered. This is really old stuff. But he was one of those people who took those things about as seriously as anybody could, I think, and really did something quite remarkable with them. We may never become the best radiologist or internist or surgeon or whatever it is we want to be. Nurse, clinical psychologist, chaplain, who knows? But we can, in Wooden's point of view, strive to become as close to the best as our potential permits. And that's, from his point of view, what really matters more than anything else. So if this presentation is correct, we need to spend some of our time looking outside the traditional confines of the profession of medicine for insights and inspirations that we don't find at our professional meetings or in our professional journals, but that as human beings, we all desperately need. If I were a psychiatrist or a clinical psychologist, I'd try to make my name through this new disorder, IDD. Inspiration deficit disorder. I think a whole lot of us in medicine are really outwardly quite successful and doing very well, thank you, but are in fact starving for inspiration, And I think that's why we have so much trouble and spend so much time talking about burnout, precisely because we've let some of the most important things that can be sources of inspiration for us pretty much drop out of our professional discourse.
Doctor,
Often at the most high-powered places. Yes, please.
sorry to interrupt. I do have a question on the chat for you. What inspires you personally? What are the things that you like to be involved in outside of medicine?
Well, I'm just fortunate to be able to do a lot of relatively speaking, a lot of teaching and writing outside of my, career as a pediatric radiologist and physician. And that's a real source of inspiration for me. You won't hard to believe looking at me, but at one time I was a pretty serious tennis player. Those days are past me. I haven't touched a racket in several years, not because of physical disability but I've just discovered that some things in life seem more important, more fulfilling than, trying to put more topspin on my backhand or something like that. And I think it's, each of us is the first and only version of ourselves there will ever be. And we've got to know who that person is and what that person is capable of contributing. And then, my interests lie in things like books and, classes and things like that at a college or university, I should say. That may be different for you, but to find out what those things are and then pursue them like they really matter is a key part, I think, of leading a really rich and fulfilling life. It's not the money or professional accolades or, anything you could accumulate in a room or in a bank vault. It's, what you feel like you're contributing, the difference you're making in the lives of others. And if you can figure out how you are supposed to make that difference, that turns out to be the key that unlocks something really extraordinary. Yeah, thanks for that question. Very good. It looks to me like we're at the end of the hour, so we probably need to stop. But thanks so much for your attention. I hope you see this, by the way, as not the end of a talk, but the beginning of a conversation.